Okay, we're at the top of page 47 now, starting with the backyard barbecue. So go to the top of page 47. Don't forget to follow along. It will help you read. When he saw him, the meal had been turkey, and they cooked it in the backyard in the barbecue over charcoal with the lid down tight. His father had put chips of hickory wood on the charcoal, and the smell of cooking turkey and the hickory smoke had filled the yard. When his father took the lid off, smiling, the smell that had come out was unbelievable. And when they sat down to eat the meat was wet with juice and rich and had the taste of smoke in it. He had to stop this. His mouth was full of saliva. His stomach was twisting and growling. What was there to eat? What had he read or seen that told him something about food in the wilderness? Hadn't there been something? A program, yes. A program on television about Air Force pilots and some kind of course they took. A survival course. All right, he had the program coming into his thoughts now. The pilots had to live in the desert. They put them in the desert, down in Arizona or someplace, and they had to live for a week. They had to find food and water for a week. For water, they had made a sheet of plastic into a dew-gathering device. And for food, they ate lizards. That was it. Of course, Brian had lots of water, and there weren't too many lizards in the Canadian woods that he knew. One of the pilots had used a watch crystal as a magnifying glass to focus the sun and start a fire so they didn't have to eat with the lizards raw. But Brian had a digital watch without a crystal, broken at that. So the program didn't help him much. Wait, there was one thing. One of the pilots, a woman, had found some kind of beans on a bush, and she had used them with her lizard meat to make a little stew in a tin can she had found. Bean and lizard stew. There weren't any beans here, but there must be berries. There had to be berry bushes around. Sure, the woods were full of berry bushes. That's what everybody always said. Well, he had actually never heard anybody say it, but he felt that it should be true. There must be berry bushes. He stood and moved out into the sand and looked up at the sky. It was still high. He didn't know what time it must be. At home, it would be 1 or 2 if the sun were that high. At home, at 1 or 2, his mother would be putting away the lunch dishes and getting ready for her exercise class. No, that would have been yesterday. Today she would be going to see him. Today was Thursday, and she always went to see him on Thursdays. Wednesday was the exercise class, and Thursday she went to see him. Hot little jets of hate worked at his thoughts, pushed once, moved back. If his mother hadn't begun to see him and forced the divorce, Brian wouldn't be here now. He shook his head, had to stop that kind of thinking. The sun was still high, and that meant he had some time before darkness to find berries. He didn't want to be away from the shelter, he almost thought of it as home, shelter when it came to be dark. He didn't want to be anywhere in the woods when it came to be dark. He didn't want to get lost, which was a real problem. All he knew in the world was the lake in front of him and the hill at his back and the ridge. If he lost sight of them, there was a really good chance that he would get turned around and not find his way back. So he had to look for berry bushes, but keep the lake or the rock ridge in sight at all times. He looked up at the lake shore to the north. For a good distance, perhaps 200 yards, it was fairly clear. There were tall pines, the kind with no limbs, until very close to the top with a gentle breeze sighing in them, but not too much low brush. 200 yards up there seemed to be a belt of thick lower brush starting, about 10 or 12 feet high, and that formed a wall he could not see through. It seemed to go around the lake, thick and lushly green, but he could not be sure. If there were berries, they would be in that brush, he felt. And as long as he stayed close to the lake so he could keep the water on his right and know it was there, he wouldn't get lost. When he was done, or found berries, he thought, he would just turn round so the water was on his left and walk back until he came to the ridge and his shelter. Simple. Keep it simple. I am Brian Robeson. I have been in a plane crash. I'm going to find some food. I'm going to find berries. He walked slowly, still a bit pained in his joints and weak from hunger, up along the side of the lake. The trees were full of birds singing ahead of him in the sun. Some he knew, some he didn't. He saw a robin and some kind of sparrows, and a flock of reddish-orange birds with thick beaks. 20 or 30 of them were sitting in one of the pines. They made much noise and flew away ahead of him when he walked under the tree. He watched them fly, their colour a bright sash in solid green, and in this way he found the berries. The birds landed in some taller willow type of undergrowth with wide leaves. Okay, we're going to stop there. We're at the top of page 50, and the next bit's really short. No, change of plan, I'll keep going. At first, he was too far away to see what they were doing, but their colour drew him, and he moved towards them, keeping the lake in sight on his right. And when he got closer, he saw they were eating berries. He could not believe it was that easy. It was as if the birds had taken him right to the berries. The slender branches went up about 20 feet and were heavy, drooping with clusters of bright red berries. They were half as big as grapes, but hung in bunches much like grapes. And when Brian saw them glistening red in the sunshine, he almost yelled. His pace quickened, and he was within them in moments, scattering the birds, grabbing branches, stripping them to fill his mouth with berries. He almost spat them out. It wasn't that they were bitter so much as that they lacked any sweetness. They had a tart flavour that left his mouth dry feeling, and they were like cherries in that they had large pips, which made them hard to chew. But there was such a hunger in him that he could not stop, and kept stripping branches and eating berries by the handful, grabbing and jamming them into his mouth and swallowing them, pips and all. He could not stop, and when at last his stomach was full, he was still hungry. 2 days without food must have shrunk his stomach, but the drive of hunger was still there. Thinking of the birds and how they would come back into the berries when he left, he made a carrying pouch of his torn anorak and kept picking. Finally, when he judged he had close to 4 pounds in the jacket, he stopped and went back to his camp by the ridge. Now, he thought, now I have some food and I can do something about fixing this place up. He glanced at the sun and saw that he had some time before dark. If only I had matches, he thought, looking ruefully at the beach and lakeside. There was driftwood everywhere, not to mention dead and dry wood all over the hill, and dead dry branches hanging from every tree. All firewood and no matches. How did they used to do it, he thought? Rub 2 sticks together? He tucked the berries in the pouch back in under the overhang in the cool shade and found a couple of sticks. After 10 minutes of rubbing, he felt the sticks and they were almost cool to touch. Not that, he thought. They didn't do fire that way. He threw the sticks down in disgust. So, no fire. But he could still fix the shelter and make it. Here the word safer came into his mind, and he didn't know why. More livable. Kind of close it in, he thought. I'll just close it in a bit. He started dragging sticks up from the lake and pulling long dead branches down from the hill, never getting out of sight of the water and the ridge. With these he interlaced and wove a wall across the opening of the front of the rock. It took over 2 hours, and he had to stop several times because he still felt a bit weak, and once because he felt a strange new twinge in his stomach. A tightening, rolling. Too many berries, he thought. I ate too many of them. But it was gone soon, and he kept working until the entire front of the overhang was covered, save for a small opening at the right end, nearest the lake. The doorway was about 3 feet, and when he went in, he found himself in a room almost 15 feet long and 8 to 10 feet deep, with the rock wall sloping down at the rear. "Good," he said, nodding. "Good." Outside, the sun was going down, finally, and in the initial coolness the mosquitoes came out again and clouded in on him. They were thick, terrible, if not quite as bad as in the morning, and he kept brushing them off his arms until he couldn't stand it, and then dumped the berries and put the torn anorak on. At least the sleeves covered his arms. Wrapped in the jacket, with darkness coming down fast now, he crawled back in under the rock and huddled and tried to sleep. He was deeply tired and still aching a little bit, but sleep was slow coming and did not finally settle in until the evening cool turned to night cool and the mosquitoes slowed. Then at last, with his stomach turning on the berries, Brian went to sleep. That's the end of page 52, and now we're up to chapter 7.